This episode may contain material which may be unsuitable for some listeners.
This is an insider's account of a colossal fall from grace, a family insider's account. How a global business tycoon, a true rags to riches story, got away with decades of and sex trafficking. Peter Nygard was once an icon of his family, but now he sits in a Canadian jail cell, nothing more than inmate number 100-153-7716. He was once one of the richest men in Canada, idolized by both his family and his community.
Welcome to Warren, Ohio. I was selling tons of your clothes last night.
He fashioned himself an international playboy, and society agreed. Yet that playboy image wasn't so playful. It was dark, dangerous, and destructive. He's always been a spectacle. One part Liberace, one part Hugh Hefner, and one part Fabio, with his flamboyant fur coats, open shirts, and long flowing blonde hair. But he's also been described as worse than Jeffrey Epstein, Harvey Weinstein, and Bill Cosby combined. Today, Peter Nygard is locked up for the sexual assault and rape of multiple women. And he's also facing several more criminal trials across Canada and the US. On top of that, he stands accused of the rape and trafficking of more than 130 women who've signed on to a class action civil suit. But here's the thing. It's estimated that there are so many more victims, maybe even thousands, who haven't yet come forward and likely never will. Women who Nygard typically lured with the promise of modeling contracts that would make them famous. Or maybe he'd offer a lifestyle of glamour and excess that they could never achieve on their own.
We love you, Peter!
But some he didn't even bother to entice. Instead, they say he just drugged them. He drugged them to have his way. Nygard got his start back in the 1970s with women's clothing, affordable, easy to care for clothing when women were just entering the workforce.
He had charisma. He had this larger-than-life ego, larger-than-life personality, and he was a huge flirt. Women swooned. He entered the room, and it was like a light went on.
Peter Nygard.
We do the real people. That's our marketplace. You will not find another product as competitively priced as ours.
Welcome back to Uncle Peter, a Drop Dead Serious podcast. As he rose in stature and mega wealth, his appetite for women and power seemed insatiable, and eventually, Peter Nygard came apart at the seams. He was out of control. His employees worked around the clock, answering to his every demand until they could no longer. Because in 2020, Nygard's empire came crashing down. Bankruptcy, accusations, and an FBI raid of his New York headquarters, plus a stunning arrest in Canada. It is unclear exactly when Peter Nygard turned into the monster that he became, or if that monster was always lurking beneath the surface. He had an unrelenting obsession with work, rivaled only by his obsession with women, whether they wanted him or not. In today's episode of Uncle Peter, we look into the unraveling of Peter Nygard, the path of destruction he left in his wake, and the devastation that he caused his family. All of this through the eyes of my childhood best friend, Angela Dyborn, Peter Nygard's niece. Growing up, we called him Uncle Peter.
I want you to describe, if you can, Peter seemed to lose connection with reality, especially when it came to business. And as you've described it to me, he would seize and fixate on like tiny minutia, signing off on housekeepers' paychecks. Like, describe how that came about and what it was like.
An example would be when the company was almost in bankruptcy weeks beforehand, where he should have been focusing all of his energy on saving his company and working with the creditors. He was more interested in what the time cards for the marina housekeepers and the staff at Marina Del Rey, what time they were logging in and how they were getting paid. So he was sitting there literally going through hour by hour of staff signing in to make an adjustment of $275, $300. It doesn't sound like a lot.
But the whole ship is sinking.
The whole ship's sinking, but he's more interested.
He's not rearranging the deck chairs on the Titanic. He's rearranging the toothpicks on the Titanic.
In the canisters
at
in
the bar.
Yeah. Yep. And he would spend hours doing this. I think it was avoidance almost, right? It was like avoidance, like all this
Delusion.
is happening. A delusion, avoidance. It was mind-boggling that he could spend that much time on, and then he also wanted to approve every single little thing, every paycheck, everything for a company payroll. The company was in financial chaos, financial collapse. He should have been on that upper macro side,
Right.
steering the ship,
Yeah.
not arranging the deck chairs.
30,000-foot view. So had he lost his mind?
I think he has. I believe he's lost it over the years. It's not just one mental illness or psychotic break. It's been a slow slide, and then it's been living in this fantasy world, then people building a fantasy world around you where everything you say is right, and whatever you say happens.
It just compounded
and it's
it.
completely disconnected from reality.
I think Peter had a ton of hangers-on all through his life who thought they were going to get something, like ride those coattails and get a great job or get a modeling job, or if you're a executive, stick with it because you'll end up as the top paid executive, bonuses, etc. You'll ride the jet, you'll live the lifestyle, you'll get to be with the girls with him, etc. But once the power ended, he is jailed with no bail, you know. Was it just an epiphany of how many people were like, I'm out, no point, I'm out?
Everybody left him. Everybody left. As the minute everything started going down, because it wasn't just the transactional girls and it wasn't just some of the people that hang on. It was everybody.
It was
in his
executives,
orbit.
it was everybody.
It was everybody.
It may be hard to believe, but it took until Peter Nygard was arrested before many in his family finally saw him for the criminal that he was. And some of them never came to terms, having died before he was truly exposed. Nygard always insisted on fierce family loyalty, and he got it. Perhaps blinded by his fame, his fortune, and his penchant to retaliate, it wasn't until the drumbeat of accusations became just too loud to ignore that they saw the real Peter Nygard. For decades, those accusers, they were considered liars to the family, jilted women who were out for a payday. That started with a case in Winnipeg way back in 1980, a young woman who reported Peter to the police, and remarkably, even though it was 1980, he was charged.
What did the family make of that 1980s charge? I mean, that got serious. The police charged him. It was a case. It was an actual case, not just a whisper and not just a rumor.
Peter wasn't wrong. I mean, the family, Peter wasn't wrong. Peter was in the right, and they were doing this to Peter. Peter was innocent, and it had nothing to do with...
They really believed it.
They really believed it.
There was no chance it could have been true.
Obviously, now we know there was a chance, but
Now,
but back then
but
there
back
wasn't.
then-
Back then, it was just a setup. I would have been, 13 years old and heard about it, and it made the news all over Winnipeg. It was devastating. I went home that day from school, and it was explained, but my parents explained. I remember hearing that it was a setup. They wanted to get into his office. There's all this justification, but that would have come from Peter.
As things became obvious that he had an insatiable, voracious appetite for women and eventually girls, did the family's estimation of him, pride in him, ever waver? Did his sister or his mom or his dad, before they died, did it ever waver? Did they ever start wondering?
I feel that they've always felt that that was just part of him. I think that that's that overarching playboy part was still him. But I do think they started to wonder where was it going to end. I remember my mom saying, like, what's next? Where does this end? From overheard conversations, I could hear that there seemed to be some kind of concern about what his actual behavior behind the scenes might be, or what he was really into. I think my mom was afraid of him. Like, my mom worshipped him on one hand, but was terrified of him on the other hand.
But never did anybody say, we need to pull him aside. He might be bordering on illegal here.
They would have never seen it. They would just have seen that women wanted his money, that women and girls, like, because it didn't look like that from the outside. For so many years, it was just women kind of, him hitting on women, women hitting on him.
Girlfriends. Yeah.
It was a normalized thing. And my grandparents, my mom, nobody would have ever said anything to him.
I'm going to tell you, there were no whisper rumors when we were growing up in the 80s that there was anything wrong with what he was doing. Like, having all those girls and women around him, I don't recall anyone looking askance or criticizing it, ever. If this was all happening in the lens today, do you think that your grandmother and your mom would have been way more savvy and, like, snapped into reality for what he was doing sooner?
You know, I don't
Again,
know.
today's lens
even
is very
today's
different.
lens, I think it would take a lot of convincing. I think it would take a lot. I think their brains were still so much, and they were so locked in on
Conditioned that he was perfect.
that he was perfect, that he was the hero, that it was the women that were throwing themselves at Peter, that he could do no wrong.
It may have been hard to see Peter for what he really was, because Peter was such a showman with unbridled potential. He built a huge clothing empire from nothing, but then blew it all up by his own doing. My mom, Susie Lound, knew Peter Nygard well. They were friends. So too were my mom and Peter's sister, Lisa. I sat down with my mom to talk about the Nygard that she remembers, an astute businessman, again, with all that potential, but a playboy whose behavior nobody questioned.
When all of the economics were so wonderful, one doesn't want to question where the basis of that comes from in that particular case.
When the power model extends to the family at that point.
That's right. Yeah. Well, you know, his mother and father were so proud of him, and his sister, Lisa, was so proud of him. I mean, they were all very, very proud of Peter, and he was so good to them. I don't know whether they ever looked at the cracks. He really has destroyed his image.
And others.
He had a great deal of talent, and he worked very hard to get to a point where he was highly regarded in the fashion industry, and then it became a disaster.
I remember as, a teenager hearing about Peter's lifestyle. And back then it wasn't considered illegal, but it was sort of gross.
Oh, sort of gross. Well, I think men today cannot behave the way men got away with behaving in the 50s, the 40s, the 50s, the 60s.
The 80s.
I guess even up to the 80s. They were closeted away, and they were whispered about. I think Peter was always whispered about. Hugh Hefner was always whispered about.
Did he seem like a Hugh Hefner?
I think he did, and I think he saw himself as the same as Hugh Hefner. That Hugh was able to do all this, so why shouldn't he? I do think so. And I'm not sure that Hugh Hefner was any better than Peter.
So the way people looked at him with all of his young women that he surrounded himself with, the bachelor for life kind of lifestyle, nobody derided him for it, right?
No, they didn't. I think there was a certain amount of secretive lifestyle then. Some of these men lived very, very nasty lifestyles. They did. And they were never questioned about it. He was the rich and famous. He very definitely was. He could have anything he wanted. He could buy anything he wanted. And unfortunately, as we all know, he sank into a depths of
Depravity.
disaster. Depravity, that's what I was thinking. That's the word. Because that's exactly what it was.
As for his family, Angela really filled in the blanks on loyalty. She told us the family stood by Peter Nygard despite everything, despite all the accusations, until 2020. That's when vile and ugly details began to surface in lawsuits, and maybe more importantly, details with a lot of corroborating evidence. The reports became impossible to ignore.
How did you finally see the light and go from defender to believer?
It was a bit of a process because at first I absolutely was a defender. I'd been a defender my entire life and conditioned to defend. I think after that first case and after the first iteration of the class action was one of the first times that I started looking at what nuggets of truth are in here, not what nuggets of lies.
And the truth started lining up. I mean, even just the filthy stories of his kink matched what you had to face. You'd see some detail that didn't match up, and you'd seize.
I mean, maybe that's a self-protection thing, right? Like, you don't want to see it. Like, this is this person that has, as crappy as he's been to you all his life.
It's Uncle Peter.
It is still Uncle Peter. Still my uncle. And all through time, you've only ever been conditioned to say, no, this isn't true, this isn't true, this isn't true. And it's like, holy hell, this is true. It's heartbreaking. It's left a path of destruction.
Was he ever inappropriate in any way with you?
Not sexually inappropriate, but I remember one time we were at a party and he came up behind me and he kind of, his hands, as we talked about, and he grabbed my butt. But then I looked back, from the back, I don't think he realized it was me. I turned around and he was completely horrified that it was actually my butt that he grabbed. I was equally
mortified,
disgusted and mortified.
Angela may have been mortified by that encounter, but not unaccustomed to sexual deviance. Throughout this podcast, Angela is speaking publicly for the first time about what life with her Uncle Peter was like, his volatility and explosive anger, the sex cult in which she grew up, and the sick lessons that he made normal in their family. He was crude and inappropriate and very, very mean. Angela grew up in that environment where women were objects paraded around and cast off at will. Angela herself was sexually abused several times by different men. But in Uncle Peter's world, that was just part of life.
I wound up being sucked in almost as one of, not a sexual victim, but a victim to his
way of
charisma,
thinking,
his worth, his thinking, and my life. So then I became dependent. Later on, I would become more kind of dependent for a job and dependent on stuff because I started to kind of fall into place. This is not right. My dad said this isn't right. My dad was just horrified. There was a big rift between my dad and Peter over the years. My dad got further and further out of that, and my parents' relationship kind of broke up.
Sounds like he was getting wise.
So my dad stepped away from all of the family and the stuff. And
so you think your dad got wise to Peter?
Oh, my dad worked for Peter in the 70s.
And your dad didn't want part of it?
My dad went, no part of it.
Here's how Peter's dysfunction rubbed off on the whole family. At 17, Angela got pregnant by a 35-year-old married man. Through the lens of Peter's world, Angela didn't see it as rape. Her mom, Peter's sister, lost her husband when he simply would no longer stand for Peter's behavior. And then there are the children. It is unclear exactly how many children Peter Nygard fathered. Angela counted 9 children to 7 different women, but other reports put it at 10 children to 8 different women. And it's believed Nygard has many more children we don't even know about. And in perhaps some of the more disturbing revelations to emerge from the lawsuit, Peter Nygard's own sons described vile behavior and sexual abuse.
One of the biggest aspects of this story is that his own kids have turned on him. 3 of his sons. Yeah. Kai, very, very publicly in the press. Yeah. And then 2 of his other sons are suing him for statutory rape, alleging that he sent his girlfriend in to make a man out of them. Effectively, at 14 and 15 years old, have sex with them to make them men. It's unbelievable, except for we're talking about Peter Nygard.
There are no lines in Peter's morality. There are no lines in anything. I just think that would just be no different than giving your child a bicycle. I'm not sure what.
So that's an interesting concept, is that he would look at it as a gift to his 14-year-old and 15-year-old. He would never consider that it's statutory.
Exactly. Yeah. But I can see it happening. I can see him being somebody looking at it like a favor or a gift, no different than giving his kids a bicycle. I mean, that is what he would have done.
Does Peter just not believe that people can be raped?
I don't know. It feels like it. Like right now, it certainly feels like it when you start to look at this whole case and all the people involved and everything going on.
It's just that if he wants sex, he gets it, and that's just the way of the world. Yeah, there's nothing wrong with it.
Yeah, and if you want to, if I want to send this person to have sex with that person, they should be fine with that. If I have an executive in town, I'm going to send this person to go have sex with him. Then
sex is for gifting and using at your own leisure, regardless of the.
And there's really nothing more tied to it. Yeah,
there's nothing else there, and it doesn't matter what the partner thinks.
Looking at from Peter's, the degrees or whatever's gone on with it, I can see Peter doing something like that.
You could see him doing it. Yeah. You could see his personality believing that this is the right thing to do.
Yep.
It's time to make my boys into men. And in his estimation, you're only a man if you've had sex, if you've lost your virginity.
Yeah.
How has the family processed that? Because that is really on the inside. I mean, family members being victimized by rape and joining class action suits, how are they weighing in?
I think the initial class action sort of started to create cracks and started to sever the family a bit, but something like that completely shattered it. The case is so complex.
It is complex. It's not as though, I don't see any family members that disbelieve that Peter was capable of this behavior. And yet there are still schisms. Is it money? Is it frustration? What's causing this incredible series of fissures throughout all the kids and cousins?
I think there's so many different, there's the class action. So there's so many parts where people are, even in the suit, are almost being pitted against each other, where we should be working together, because I think together it would be a easier way to help the victims, and we all want to help the victims. So I think we should, instead of shattering and kind of trying to play the he said, she said, and what's really going on, we should be really looking and saying, look, these things all make sense. What else can we find that will help and support people?
There's one photo you showed me that was so disturbing. It was something that Peter gave to his son, Kai. And he had a handwritten note on the side. Describe it and explain what that was.
So Peter, having no boundaries on virtually anything. When I was cleaning up some old paperwork, I saw, to my number one son, found a woman for you. And it was some scrawny, old, 90-year-old woman in these pornographic positions.
Completely
it was supposed
naked.
to be completely naked and sagging. And it was supposed to be, I imagine in his brain, funny. It was horrifying. I mean, you look at it, it takes a second to realize what it is.
This is what he gave his son as a fun little letter memo joke.
Yeah. Like a joking.
A naked woman, of extreme advanced age, posing in pornographic positions. Yeah. That would be appropriate in Peter's mind.
And during a period of time there when it was right when you could start pulling images from the internet and having them printed. Mm-hmm. I think he was sort of finding some fun's probably
right. Well, that would be fun for him.
And
did Kai say anything about that? Did he ever say?
No, I just found that Kai, that would have been normal. That wouldn't have been like a ha happy Merry Christmas.
I am holding that photo in my hands right now, and I am trying to imagine Uncle Peter scribbling those words in the margin. To my son, Daddy knows best. This is the woman I found for you. Enjoy, Peter Nygard. It is one of the more disturbing series of pornographic shots I've ever seen. An extremely old woman, completely naked and contorted into vile sexual positions. It is so hard to think that a father would pass something like this along to his own son.
How angry are you at Peter?
I'm beyond angry. I don't even look at him like an uncle. I know I've used the term my uncle and acknowledging that he is my uncle, but I think I'm more in the loss of the businesses more than I'm more in the loss of him right now. I'm sad that the entities that I grew up with, the companies and the people I worked with and stuff aren't there anymore.
Where is all the money? All the untold hundreds of millions. Where is all the money?
I think there's a couple things there. I think that he overinflated. When people say that he was had $900 million, I don't think that was ever what he had in his bank account. That was the worth or the sales, the volume for the company, like a big company. So that number is skewed. He has been engaged in legal fees, like legal fights, like huge, like legal wars for well over a decade. Millions and millions of dollars there. He's had some, per month, by the way. He has had some huge ego projects, like his 50th anniversary party. That was in the millions and millions of dollars.
Tonight we celebrate our 50th anniversary in business, a spectacular achievement under the leadership of Peter Nygard. Peter, I'd like you to stand so all of us can tell you with applause how highly you are regarded. Peter Nygard.
Peter Nygard's 50th anniversary party. Wow. It was a party he threw for himself, for his business, and for his ego. It was back in 2018, and even then, few thought twice about celebrating the successes of Peter Nygard. The party was chock full of dignitaries. I was invited. I couldn't make it, though. My mom was invited, and she went.
His reputation, whatever it was, wasn't bad enough. No. A lot of people gravitated to that party.
Just hundreds and hundreds of people. All the dignitaries and all the people that are very proud of Peter and what he's done. And it was a big fashion show, the whole 9 yards. And he was there enjoying watching the whole thing go by.
All his clothes.
And it was over the years of all of the clothes and all the styles. And it was a historical show.
I appreciate you all for coming. It's important for me to make a contribution to everybody's life in this stage of my life.
I think they were just all celebrating this very successful clothing designer and creative man. 50 years of an exciting time.
Lots of successful people came.
Oh,
there were
tons of
There
them.
were politicians. There were
Yes, everybody was there, and everybody enjoyed it very much.
Representing the governor of Finland in Canada to congratulate you and the whole Nygard team.
Peter, or Pekka, as his Finnish friends call him, has succeeded in a tough industry for 50 years because of his foresight and vision.
Nobody felt as though I shouldn't be there.
Nobody felt that they shouldn't be there because of Peter's behavior. Not at all. Or they wouldn't have been there. No. And the celebrations went on for 2 days.
The record shows I took the blow.
Even country legend Tanya Tucker was a guest of honor at the big celebration, right up there on stage, helping him to serenade himself.
I love you, Peter Nygard.
Throughout the big celebration, she was right by his side, taking in the big show in the seat next to Peter. People close to Peter say Tanya Tucker was a dear, dear old friend of his. Peter Nygard, a sex predator operating in the spotlight, almost always right in front of an audience. And all the while, hemorrhaging millions to bolster his ego and live a life of caviar dreams.
He's bought bizarre, airplanes and yachts and all these things. And
you once said that he would leave a jet on the runway for hours and hours and hours waiting for him, burning through jet fuel.
Yeah.
At like $60,000 for being late.
Yeah.
Like this was how he kind of hemorrhaged money.
He hemorrhaged money.
And then also got crazy with business. Like he started doing these business projects that made 0 sense and would rot in warehouses.
He did. At the end, the receivers or the people that took over, like when the company went into basically bankruptcy, American equivalent bankruptcy, there were containers and warehouses full of future business ideas where he would ego projects.
One of those ego projects, a denim jacket. He had thousands of them made for the 50th anniversary of the company. But instead of a giant 50 on the back, which would have been appropriate, he stenciled his own likeness on the back, folded arms, bulging muscles, and flowing hair. At $120 a pop, it is unknown if even one of them sold.
His business decisions were terrible.
Terrible.
Irrational. Like he got crazy.
He did.
There was an incident you told me about in the Bahamas. There was some kind of big party, and you were in the kitchen at the end, and the leftovers from the food were in the kitchen, and the Bahamian specialty is peas and rice, which is basically beans and rice. It's the cheapest food you could ever find. And there was a bowl full that was left over, maybe a quart or something, or maybe a couple quarts or whatever of peas and rice. Yeah. And he went ballistic.
Like,
what was that about?
It was just that warped mind. He thought we were wasting his money. And
on peas and rice.
On peas and rice. So he came in to the kitchen, looked at the pot. There was maybe a quart at most of stuff on the bottom of a pot, a big catering pot, slammed it onto the ground.
Threw it on the ground. The food, what was left in it kind of spread all over the pan, and then started cursing at me and poking at my chest to the point where I got bruises, cursing and spitting in my face. For wasting money.
For wasting his money. How dare I waste his money. At this exact same time, we'd been trying to get him out, trying to get him to leave the property, to go to his airplane that's sitting on the tarmac, burning thousands of dollars
of fuel
every minute, as he's sitting there arguing about there's maybe 13 cents, 15 cents worth of food.
Peas and rice on the floor.
And that took
and he's poking you and you were bruised.
That's a physical assault. I mean, that is, but it wouldn't have crossed my mind that I should have said something to the police about it. I should have. And
it's your fault. You probably thought it was your fault.
Yeah.
It was always all about Peter. He even believed he could clone himself. The reason? To leave all of his money to his clone, to himself. His kids, they got nothing. I actually got a hold of a picture of Peter on his private jet, where he is holding a small square plexiglass container. It kind of looks like the contents are liquid. Peter insisted it was his scientific clone in that liquid. The people around him used to joke that it was his mini-me.
In one of the text chains you showed me with one of his children, upon hearing of the horrifying class action civil suit allegations that turned into criminal charges and convictions, she seemed so shocked that this was possible.
We were broadsided. It kind of just came out of, just slammed. It was...
You didn't know before the press.
It was out of the blue. It was just all of a sudden we started reading it, and it was just like, it was like a full break, full stop, what's happening.
And in one of the parts of the text chain, it said, is he just not going to leave us anything? Like she seemed bewildered that she was going to be left destitute. Did the kids always think there was going to be something there for them?
I think they did. I think they believed it. They thought one day all of that will be theirs.
They got nothing.
Got nothing from Peter. I think that's the other kind of
fallacy. Like people
about all
believe
this whole story.
Everybody believes every one of his kids and the family were all rich.
Yeah, that we were like, living, you watch stories on Ralph Lauren or some people who have children and even their nieces and nephews who are
living
in
large
these dynasties. But it was a dynasty, but it certainly wasn't our dynasty.
I remember being sort of angry, realizing after 20 some odd years that you were living paycheck to paycheck. And I thought, you've been working for this guy for so long and you literally work 12 to 14 hours a day. How are you struggling? But you weren't the only one.
Yeah. No, I wasn't. I mean, I had 2 or 3 jobs. And once he'd leave town, my hours would go down a little bit focused to him. And so I'd be able to pick up some other gigs. Still, though, answering 24 hours to him. If there was a call from the Nygard company.
But the kids, too, not living large either.
Yeah, nobody was. Everybody was living. And to think, I think the idea, though, became almost from some people, but we're living off of him. We're taking advantage of his money by...
That's what he made you think.
Yeah, exactly. That's what...
It's just weird to think this guy's jetting around the world and he's basically, if not a billionaire, he's just a shade under it. And his kids are living paycheck to paycheck and struggling.
Driving beat-up cars, like Bianca's...
And working hard for him.
And working hard.
On the next episode of Uncle Peter, will anyone claim Peter's body when he dies? Especially since he'll most likely die behind bars. After fathering so many children with so many mothers, the answer might surprise you.
I'm not sad that he's dying alone, so it's so hard to...
You think he deserves to die alone?
Yeah, I think he deserves to die alone. I think he's hurt so many people. I think he'll be buried in an unmarked grave somewhere with a little plot.
Plus, with 4 criminal trials in 2 countries, which of the victims is going to get justice? Which ones might not? And what exactly would justice even look like?
I would like to see him suffer and see, guilty, 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 and all of the things thrown at him, and just to hurt his pride. He has a God complex, and if we can chip away at that while he's still alive, then for me that would be justice.
Plus, Peter Nygard writes to me from jail. I'll read you what he wants me to do. You've been listening to Uncle Peter, a Drop Dead Serious podcast. If you or someone you know has been a victim of sexual assault, please call your local sexual assault hotline.